Well, I think we're in the middle of the collapse right now. The Ukrainian military establishment is incapable of doing a great deal any longer. They don't have any major reserves that they can throw into the breach, and I think now, especially with their Azov units, they're husbanding those, even though those are largely Ministry of Interior units. They're holding them back, I think, to protect themselves. That is the regime, and hopefully keep it in power in Kiev. What you described is interesting because these were to be the so-called fortress cities that would be defended bitterly against the Russians. It's very reminiscent, frankly, of 1944, uh, June and July, when Hitler declared certain states, or not states but cities, Mogilev and others, as fortress places that would be defended to the bitter end. And it was simply impossible to do so. And a lot of people simply disobeyed his orders because they'd been defending every inch of ground for the previous year and a half to 2 years. It was a waste of time. I think that same sort of mentality has set in with the Ukrainians. And right now, many Ukrainian troops are just hopefully getting out of the way because they can't stop it. And you ask yourself, if you're a Ukrainian soldier at this point, the war is obviously lost. We have nothing to throw into the battle. So why should I sacrifice my life? What difference will it make to the outcome? I think that's the mentality that's taking hold in Ukraine. And even the most pro-Ukrainian channels are admitting to the disaster if you listen to them carefully. So I think I think this is sinking in. The question again is, uh, President Putin and his colleagues in this inner circle that is running things, they have specific goals and objectives. How many of those have been reached and how many not? It's hard for me to judge sitting where I am. I think the plan or desire or goal to annihilate the Ukrainian military establishment is largely achieved. But then you have these problems. You have the Germans, of course, who stand up and say, well, we'll provide Taurus missiles. Well, this is outrageous nonsense. That's like, you've got a wounded, exhausted soldier. He's the last man on the field. And you hand him this flamethrower and say, go at it, do the best you can. It's not going to make any difference to the outcome of the war, but it makes the people in Kiev, happy because it creates the illusion there's something left. And it also makes the globalists and neocons who are running Europe happy because they think they're still harming Russia. It's all nonsense. And I think President Putin has tried very hard to make it clear to the Germans that if they provide these Taurus missiles, they're launched from Ukraine against Moscow or St. Petersburg or anywhere else, that they will treat Germany as a co-belligerent and they will attack Germany. How, when, and where, and what, that's another matter. I hope the Germans are listening because I think the Russians are quite serious that Ukraine has lost the war. And that's true. The Ukrainian war against Russia, which is a proxy war on the part of Washington against Russia, is lost. And if we look at current events, it's deplorable. The Russians are now advancing in a number of areas. Obviously, there are still some battles of encirclement going on where you have pockets of modest resistance left. But the bottom line is they're advancing because there isn't much Ukrainian resistance because most of the Ukrainian troops are dead. And the ones that are showing up, we know, with a few exceptions, involve a lot of old men and boys. So Ukraine is on its last legs, which is, I think, why Zelensky is running all over Europe right now, trying desperately to find somebody to provide money and equipment that will somehow or another convey the illusion that there is still a Ukrainian state that has teeth. I don't think there is. So what I see now happening is the Russians are going to move forward to the west. I don't see any reason why they would stop at this point. I think they'll move towards Zaporozhye because you've got the bridges there over the Dnieper, which create the opportunity for the Russians, if they decide to do it, to cross. They could head south to Odessa. They could head north to Kiev, either case. Further north, you have some other penetrations, but let's face it, when they encounter the Ukrainians, their resistance is weak, and the fortifications in many cases, are no longer manned because there just aren't any Ukrainian troops to man them. So I think from a purely military standpoint, this war is over. There's no question about that at all. The Russians are now deciding to what extent their goals are being met. And I think they're having a meeting with us in Alaska as a courtesy to Donald Trump more than anything else, not because there's any necessity on their part or need for it. So I think in the final analysis, President Trump, when he goes to Alaska to meet with President Putin, is going to be polite. I think they'll both be polite to each other. And I think President Putin will make his position clear, which has not changed in a very long time. President Trump will listen. Does he completely understand what he's listening to? I don't know. I sometimes get the impression that the people that surround President Trump have a vested interest in keeping him uninformed, so that he stands up from time to time and says, oh, the Russians are taking terrible losses, and I know Putin wants to end this war. Well, of course he wants to end the war, but he's not taking heavy losses. You know, they were in double-digit losses every day. In other words, killed in action. In January and February, March, it was like 25, 30, 40, 50, 60 Russians a day. You know what it is now? It's single digit. It's single digit. The losses on the Ukrainian side, as you would expect at the end of a war when things are collapsing, are horrific. So it's a matter of plowing ahead, reaching the Dnieper River. But when you get there, the question you have to ask is, okay, we've come this far. We've achieved the goal of destroying the Ukrainian force, but we still have this facade of a government sitting in Kiev. We still don't have anyone to talk to, really. We have this man Trump, but what can he deliver? We have to understand that there really is no strategy on the Western side. There is a wish list. And the people in charge had decided, or decided early on in Western Europe and in the United States, that Russia presented a threat to globalism, a threat to their plans for Europe and their plans here in the United States. The same people that want the borders open and have invited millions of non-Europeans into the Western world for the purpose of essentially destroying what I would call the core populations of Europe and the United States, they're the ones that want desperately to destroy Russia. It's a very interesting connection. Now, I think it's failed. It's winding down in terms of the war with Russia. But why Russia? Well, Russia was this tasty morsel that everyone had wanted to consume back in the 1990s. When things fell apart, everyone poured in. When I say everyone, who are we talking about? Well, we talk about the financial capitalists, the people that make money through transaction fees by buying up things, dismantling them, and selling them off. People like this man Browder, who is very prominent in his criticism of President Putin. President Putin emerges at a very important point in the history of Russia, because up until that point, Russia was essentially defenseless, naked in the face of all of these people determined to destroy it. And when I say destroy, I mean break it up, take whatever there is of value, using any lever that they had, whether it was organized crime or direct influence from states. The idea was you break it up and you steal the 40 trillion plus resources. And whatever is left over, you set up a puppet regime. You install somebody, just as we installed the regime in Kiev in 2014 and have subsequently installed other leaders. That was the plan for Russia. We'll do to Russia what we've done to Ukraine. And Ukraine was simply a useful tool, that's all. Well, that's all failed now. That's not going to happen. But we in the West, in Western Europe, in the United States, we're stuck with the tens of millions of people that were introduced into our countries that we didn't ask for, that we didn't want, and we can't employ, and we can't pay for. So what is going to happen? I think the whole shift is going to be away from Russia at some point, and it's all going to become internal. And when that occurs, all these governments, Merz's government, Macron, Starmer, everyone, they'll all be swept away, which needs to happen. I think to some extent, President Putin has exercised restraint and patience because he's awaiting this development. I mean, he's not foolish or stupid. He knows what's going on in the West. He's one of the few in Moscow that has a real appreciation and understanding for what's happening in the West. So he's probably counseled people privately, look, let's stand by. Don't be excited. Don't try to launch any major offenses. We'll grind forward. We'll attrit this army until it doesn't exist, and then we'll take whatever we think we have to secure Russia. And again, he's never been interested in governing non-Russians. I mean, that's one of the things that nobody seems to get because of the media and the lies that everybody tells at the top of the political structures. There's no interest in going into Europe. He doesn't want to rule any Western Ukrainians. I mean, that would be a headache on a scale that we can't even begin to imagine. He knows that, doesn't want anything to do with it. He's been looking for people that are willing to step up and say, look, this war is over. You get to keep what you've won, which is Russian anyway. Now it's up to us to deal with the Ukrainians. He's been hoping that that would happen in Warsaw, in Berlin, in Bratislava, in Budapest. It hasn't happened yet, but I think we're getting closer. But the reason it hasn't happened is because of us. And I think people are beginning to figure out that what kind of staying power do we have? Our financial system is very fragile. We can't sell our debt. We've failed miserably in the bond market. Now we're turning to treasury bills and turning over the investments in every 4 to 6 weeks because we can't get anybody to invest in 10 years or 2 years. Nobody wants to buy it anymore. At some point, this locomotive, this debt-financed consumption model that we've used, which has led us to a $37 trillion national sovereign debt. Beyond that, there are probably another 10 to 20 trillion in debt in other places that Americans don't even know or appreciate. The fact of the matter is that we're nearing the end, and I think there's a sense that we're nearing the end of this debt-financed consumption system. And I think Putin has waited for this to happen. He's done everything he can, along with the rest of the world, to essentially shed debt. BRICS is all about offloading American and Western debt and being debt-free. It's about changing the whole monetary system to something that has real value. Currency, it's backed by something real, gold, maybe other precious metals too. But the point is, everyone is trying to distance themselves from us. We are what we call patient zero, the original carrier of the plague. What's the plague? Well, the plague is the dollar. The dollar is poison. It's how we pass on our debt to people. So what are people doing? They are de-dollarizing. They're getting out from under it. What I'm trying to say is that we should understand the reality of where we are in the West, which no one wants to address. But I think President Putin understands that reality. I know that Xi does. And I know that Tokyo and Seoul have figured this out. And if you go to Northeast Asia and you talk to people there, they're simply waiting for us to leave because they know we can't afford to stay much longer. I think that's going to happen in Europe as well. But in the meantime, what do we get from Washington? Well, we get this political theater. We want to maintain the fiction that we are still today what we were 30 years ago, that nothing has really changed. That's not going to work much longer.